Today on the Perception and Action podcast, Randy Sullivan and I discuss our new book, A Constraints-Led Approach to Baseball Coaching. So it's time for a call to action. Hi, this is Rob Gray from Arizona State University. I've been on a now over 25-year journey as a researcher, professor, and high-performance consultant to understand how we acquire and adapt our perceptual motor skills. Welcome to the Perception and Action podcast, where I discuss how psychological research can be applied to improving performance, accelerating skill acquisition, and designing technologies. Before we get to today's topic, I want to tell you about my new book, Learning to Optimize Movement, Harnessing the Power of the Athlete-Environment Relationship, available now on Amazon in paperback and ebook formats. This book is the follow-up to my best-selling skill acquisition book, How We Learn to Move. In it, I discuss how we can go beyond learning basic coordination to becoming an elite mover. Evidence-based principles for learning and coaching optimal movement. Take your game from proficiency to mastery. Now on to the show. Today, I'm happy to be joined again by Randy Sullivan from Florida Baseball Armory, multi-collaborator. In this case, you were co-authors, so we wanted to talk a little bit about our new book coming out. And so thanks for joining me, Randy.
Thank you, man. This is an honor. It really is. Thanks a lot. Thanks for including me in this book too. When you called and said, hey, would you help me, co-author that? I was like, it was hard not to express my excitement as much as I was excited. So
thanks. I appreciate it too, Randy. So this book, the Constraints-Led Approach to Baseball Coaching, and this is part of the Constraints-Led Approach series from Rutledge. So I think there's four. There's like a general overview. There's a golf one that I really like that I always tell people about. I think there's actually a skating one now. Figure skating, maybe. But I know there's a few more. And I think our book is going to be the fourth one. So it's part of this series on the constraints-led approach, and they're developing in different sports. So, I was really I really wanted, because I needed, you actually do this stuff. I just talk about constraints. So I needed someone that, I knew something that you'd be good at giving really examples of how you put this into play. So so we just kind of, went from there and built on that and divided it obviously into the main divisions within baseball. But yeah, I know you've been doing this for a long time, like, the constraints-led approach anyway. So it wasn't like it was a huge leap, right, to come up with examples.
It was really helpful though, because you would hit me with the chapter on the theory, and then I would say, okay, how do we apply this? And then it sort of compelled me to think, how can we apply this better? It really got me thinking on a deeper level, which is really helpful. Obviously, everything that you think you have figured out, when you review the foundations of it, it's pretty cool. You kind of always come up with something new that you didn't really understand clearly that you could do better. And so it was really, it was helpful for us as trainers here to take the concepts, because, I shared it with my staff while we were going through it, and they helped me come up with a lot of the ideas. And it was a really good challenge to make sure that we're applying ecological dynamics and using it for the valuable tool that it can be,
Yeah. Yeah, it helped a lot to me too. I think, people think the process, kind of, it helped me think, like, for both of us, kind of think through how some of the activities fit in, right? Like the thing that kind of, when I was writing, you would send me a photo of like a thing you do for batting, where people are using a water bag, and there's no ball coming. There's no thing so on the surface goes against everything we talk about, right? There's no coupling, right? So how does that fit in? And that's kind of what made me think a lot with trying to kind of build this all together. Some of these activities that you had a lot of success with, right? And so that was fun part of it for me too.
Yeah, your idea, because I kind of always wondered about that. We know that decoupling is not ideal, but we also knew that in the context of the event, you can't always acquire the skill. Like it's too much information. So you can't just, in hitting, you can't just throw balls at guys at 60 feet, 6 inches at 100 miles an hour and expect them to learn. You have to kind of learn the movement part, right? And when you explained the difference between building capacity and then working on the skill and how to integrate those two. That was really important because we can't just work on the skill. We have to build the capacity to make the movements, but then integrate it into the context of the sensory information that you get in live performance.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really clarified a lot for me as to why we do what we do and why it's been successful. So
for me too. I kind of, I've thought about this for a while, but kind of having to put it in words and kind of connect it and that helped a lot. And then, I really, it helped me a lot to kind of, I'd known about your stuff for a long time, but getting into the attractors kind of in really specific, how they fit with these different drills and things, that was really useful, helpful for me to kind of understand those. And then your phrase, right? Conditions, not positions. We kind of emphasize that through the book. Yeah.
I like that. I thought, I wasn't sure who thought of that, me or you, but
I think I got it from you.
But, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, because the thing that has become clear is that attractors are sort of vague, right? They're not real specific. They're not about joint positions or angles or anything like that. Accelerations. You won't find a data point that is an attractor. What you'll find is data points that direct you to stability in attractors, and they're more overarching conditions, things like proximal distal action, and then I got to give credit to Franz Bosch. He was the first to enlighten me. It was hearing from you and asking, hey, would you help me write this book, I was about as equally excited when Franz said, would you edit this book that I've already written before it comes out in English? And I was called the Anatomy of Agility. And it really opened my eyes to how anatomy is a constraint, right? And it is individual, but there are certain attractors that the anatomy of the human body kind of demands stability in, and they can be done a lot of different ways. But if you understand how the anatomy works, it's really helpful to kind of identify where an attractor might be and what it is, and then come up with ways to build the capacity to stabilize that attractor. If that makes any sense at all.
100%. I think it can be, like you said, it can be a little misleading sometimes. Like when you take a hip hinge, right? It sounds like you're saying, oh, the hip has to hinge at 30 degrees. That's not what Franz is saying at all, right? There's a wide range of hip hinges that work for people. But that kind of fundamental loading or whatever is kind of a condition of you need to do somehow to have effective movement. And I think I think attractors are just a great lens to observe and understand movement. I think,
I was teaching one of our new instructors, and we were going through the process, and he said this to me, and it made so much sense. He goes, "Oh, you mean the big rocks, not the little rocks?" I'm like, well, yeah, because we get so lost in the details of everything that you have to do mechanically. And if you just zoom out, these attractors are general principles, and they're not there aren't an infinite number of them. The attractor landscape, there's only certain places and certain conditions under which stability can occur. And so it really kind of simplifies the approach, really, when you think about what is an attractor. If there's a problem in the movement, find the nearest attractor. Where does it go wrong? And try to work on finding stability around that attractor. And they're all kind of interrelated. They kind of have what Franz calls the knock-on effect with one another. They kind of one thing can create another. But if you can find the gang leader, it's pretty good. And then the question is, okay, once you understand what you need to teach, I think where this book really digs deep into is, okay, how do we teach it? Because many times I think how you learn is probably more important than what you actually learn. Yeah,
for sure. I think it gives you kind of a way that kind of think through it. I think, and I think one of the things that we tried to emphasize in this, although we give lots of examples, like everybody wants examples of what drill I can use. They're not like just a set, like the list of definitive drills, right? Well, that's not the idea of this, right? The idea is I hope we did a good job of trying to explain the logic of this is what I want to change. This is how I could possibly get the person to learn how to move differently and explore different things.
Right.
Yeah.
I think also understanding that muscles and tendon. This is I learned a lot studying Franz's stuff, obviously studying your stuff, but also Mark Latache has been really influential in my work, and his idea on synergies and how they work, and a lot of the theories that you pointed me to, the general Tao theory and things like that, David Lee's stuff, that if we're trying to change the way a person moves, it's important that you expose them to an environment that speaks the language of muscles and tendons, which is force and inertia. Let's give this person's body forces and inertia problems in that language that it has to solve. Obviously, the visual array is really important too. But when we're working on the capacity of the movement, we gotta immerse the person in an experience that exposes them to forces that the body has to deal with.
Yeah.
And if you think of it that way, it becomes a lot simpler to design a training experience. I don't like to use the word drill.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, activity. Yeah,
training experience, right? Yeah. That allows the person to explore different ways to achieve stability in these movements, and then finally coupling it back to the sensory input that you get, especially open skill versus closed skill, that kind of thing. So,
yeah. No, and I think I like the way, that with the forces, I remember the first time I heard, I think it was Franz say, skill is about controlling forces, not positions. Right. That was like, like, it's not about hitting this position. Like, that's the way, right? We talked about it. Like, you teach pitching, you teach kids how to pitch, right? Is from one position to another, right? It's easy to describe, but that's not what being skillful is about. But one of the things I think you do a really good job, Randy, is like in these examples you give is creating these environments, these experiences where there's kind of a stimulus for change, right? Other than the coach saying, do this, right? There's a natural, whether it's adding instability, adding time pressure, adding variability, whatever it is, like that, let the practice environment do the talking for you, right? By creating this stimulus that moves makes a person naturally want to move differently. Yeah, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then eventually their body either decides, oh, this works way better than the other way.
Yeah.
Let's do it like that. And they kind of go with it. It may be simplistic to think of constraints as either create an environment that kind of makes it less likely that they'll do something that you don't think is an efficient move, or make an environment where it becomes so inviting to do something different that it loves it more.
Yeah. Yeah. And ideally, you can do both together.
Yeah,
that's a perfect,
exactly.
perfect.
Exactly.
You can't always, right? And I think giving, and then giving. I think about a lot of the water bag. What we're giving is like the person the opportunity to go to that movement, right? If you have a pitcher that doesn't, like I know you've talked about some, I think your example, you use Brewster Gratterall, who's a pitcher with the Dodgers who throws like 100 miles an hour and has no visible hip hinge whatsoever.
Doesn't do any of the stuff that everybody says you're supposed to do.
So when you have a player like that, do we want to totally change their movement? No, but giving, especially not at his level, right? When we're working with, giving them the option to move differently, I think, and you maybe pushing them into a different area of solution space for a while, seeing how it feels, like I think can be helpful. Doesn't mean they have to stay there, right? Yeah.
And to me, it's a safer route, not only from an injury risk standpoint, but just from I hear this all the time. I was doing this and my coach told me to do something else and it really messed me up. Right.
Mm-hmm.
When you train implicitly through the constraints-led approach and then direct differential learning eventually, because it's so not cognitive, your potential to really get somebody messed up is a lot less, right? And so you can work with a high-level player and subtly nudge them toward better movement without getting in their head and really getting them thinking about how they're doing, and then they get paralyzed and screw it up, you know? Yeah. So at every level, from like the youngest person you deal with to even the highest level big leaguer, if you use CLA as your approach, if you really dive into implicit learning and go, dive headfirst into it and commit to it, it's kind of hard to really mess somebody up. Mm-hmm. You're just asking them to try some things and let the things that you ask them to try to do hopefully nudge them toward a more effective movement solution.
Yeah. So I agree, man. This is something that it took me a while to get over that feeling in my career. I used to worry, in my studies and things, I'm going to mess up the batter by making them use a heavier bat. All right. But I've totally do not believe that anymore. Zero. Getting someone to have to adapt to this new problem you gave them is beneficial. It's all it is beneficial, right? But I've had players express that to me before. This kind of, you messed up, you messed up my swing because you made me practice with a heavy bat, and but you're right. I think it's kind of breaking that mindset as part of it, but yeah, I think you're right. As long as and you're not getting a ton of thoughts in their head about how they're doing it. Right, you're not telling them how they do it. You're letting them self-organize, and
So I love your thoughts on this. Like, I've been experimenting with this a little bit lately. Just casually fell into it, but like, sometimes if I have a new student and I just want to see how stable he is in this movement pattern that he's in, and I'll offer him a verbal cue on like change a grip or something, right, and see how mess upable they are. I'm just probing to see of change, how and if I ask him to do something different and the ball goes over the backstop, I'm like, ooh, really, really mess up. Well, this is a guy who is invested in his rigid one solution movement pattern, and the slightest little change really screws him up. Then we have to tread lightly with that guy and add variability or constraints as you might add weight to the bar in the gym. Just you got to drip it in, because this guy is his movement pattern is really not robust, right? It's not anti-fragile, if you want.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. That's exactly the word I was going to use. Like, it's very fragile. They've got this one way that they found success with. My favorite opposite example of that is there's a video of Larry Bird. He's talking to Red Auerbach about how he does his jump shot, and he's talking about all the things he does, and then he's like, watch, I'm going to shoot it way behind my head and do it wrong. And of course, the ball goes in, right? Because that's synergy, right? His body adjusts to the different. Of course, it does, right? He deliberately tried to do a bad shot to miss, and he couldn't, right? Because he's a credible, adaptable, non-fragile mover, right?
Do anything with him, and he would still be.
He could do one hand, but I think that's a good point, Randy. I think you're right. You do get people that have really been. There are a lot of thoughts going through your head. And I see this a lot too. This is something, I see smoke coming out of athletes' ears sometimes after they do their activities. And I'm like, oh, okay, we got to get, you're right. And maybe it takes a little slow kind of pushes to get out of that state. But yeah, you're right. If you throw, I think that's what I kind of meant earlier. If you throw a lot of stuff at people that have that kind of the way they move it, you're right. I think it's going to be more of a psychological. They're really going to get frustrated and lose confidence because you're pushing them away from the one way that they're used to moving.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah,
the thing that we battle with our more experienced players, college guys, sometimes pro guys, is they look at a video, and we look at a video when they come in, want to see how they're moving, but in light of these overarching attractors, right? Not like the details, looking at the big rocks to see if they can achieve a hip block and see if they can close the front of their pelvis and things like that. But then they are on the floor and they got their phone out and they make a throw and they come to me with a video and they go, hey, how does this look? And I go, I don't know. I mean, it looks okay. I mean, we got to get over this idea that there's a model that the movement should look like, right? That I think survivorship bias is huge in training and baseball player development. I think people are analyzing the details of elite movers and trying to get emerging talent to do that under the assumption that all of the elite movers or all the elite players are doing it the best way possible and are trained in the best way possible, when some of them might just be survivors of lousy movement and inefficient training. The only ones that got through. And so, which would explain why it's so hard to get there and why a lot of them get hurt, I think, is that maybe they're not doing it the best way possible. And so the idea that we're trying to get young players or emerging talent to match someone else's model, like you need to throw like Nolan Ryan or you need to throw like Roger Clemens. When you understand the anatomy, I think you can really back away from that and go, look, as a coach, I have to get over this idea that I have a predetermined mental model of what your movement's going to look like when it works.
Yeah.
It is going to emerge. I know it has to meet certain conditions, but within those conditions, which are very broad, I have to constantly discipline myself not to have a vision of what I want it to look like. Yeah. Because what I want it to look like isn't always what's best for that player. His body has to organize that himself.
Yeah, 100%, Randy. I think the videos really can be dangerous, right? Constantly looking at yourself and evaluating from the outside. And, I'd much rather you focus on what it feel like, what were the effects, where'd the ball go, right? Did you really, cut it on that pitch or, where'd the ball go off the bat? And then, but yeah, I agree with you. That can both from a coaching and the individual more, and I see now in especially individuals, they're like constantly filming and we're looking up for a video if it's available, and that can be really dangerous, right? Yeah, I think that's that's one of the central. So in the book we kind of lay out the ecological dynamics approach, and really pushing the self-organization kind of. That's a fundamental concept, obviously, within this, and and functional variability, right? Even beyond the point that the individual needs to move each individual needs to move differently. They also need to move probably slightly differently with each pitch, and as they get fatigued
within their bandwidth. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, and you talk about arm health, the definition of overuse, every injury is overuse injury.
Yeah.
The definition of overuse is doing it exactly the same way every time.
Yeah.
Right. The stresses will be exactly the same if you repeat it exactly the same way every time. And so it's like, I think of it like rotating the crops in farming or something. You got to make the stress different a little within a bandwidth, of course, but when we can train that way, we can develop that robust, okay, it's going to wander off. We just got to be able to get it back to the center or get it back to a functional outcome really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And the repeatability thing we've been chasing is really the last thing we actually want, right? Even though you can't get it anyway, but if we've got it, that's a great way to get someone hurt. Yeah. Exactly. But I think so. And another, I think we kind of, really thing we tried to bring out in the book is kind of the like intention, like important of kind of varying like goals and then what you want the athlete to do in practice. So much of it, we just practice hitting, right? Versus, and very vague, like what are we working on here? What do you want to, are you taking strikes? Are you, trying to hit a home run, trying to get out in front and pull the ball? Are you and from the pitching side, what are you trying to do with this pitch? So much of that is lacking from most practice, right? We don't vary intentions hardly at all. Yeah.
No, it's internal focused. It's not goal directed. You talked in your most recent book about the studies where when the golfers focus their attention on the head of the putter versus the arms, much better they do, etc. And so we call our training savage training, and it's an acronym, and the G stands for goal directed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Goal, always have a goal for the activity, because that sort of guides the direction of the movement, and the synergy that emerges
Mm-hmm.
is the overarching goal. But also it makes sure that we remain externally focused
Mm-hmm.
instead of internally focused on what your body parts are doing. Get externally focused. Be aware of what you felt. Okay, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Be aware of like your proprioceptive, your haptic response, but don't get so locked in internally that you forget that the purpose is to get the ball to that place in the strike zone. Right?
Yeah.
And many times by using a goal as a constraint, you can manipulate an outcome, a movement outcome, just by going, okay, instead of, it's really simple. Like, okay, the ball keeps going over there. Let's make the ball go that way.
Yeah.
Or you tend to tuck your pelvis under your spine. So let's jump toward your glove side so that your body's going to have to overcome that inertia and have a really hard time deciding to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can rotate around the hip properly,
Yeah.
Understanding that if I change the goal of the activity, oftentimes the intention results in a different movement solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your body picks up different opportunities. Yeah, organizes around the intention. And yeah, this is one thing, I've heard people say this is a problem for teasing apart the benefit. But one of the things I love about constraint set approach is you get so much else for free, right? You get external focus. Like when I tell a pitcher, throw so you have to step over a little hurdle here. You're focusing on the hurdle, right? Not your body. You automatically get the external focus for free, because they're focusing on whatever constraint you added, right? Because that's what you're telling them.
So it happens that it creates a co-contraction in your lead hip that helps tilt your pelvis longer, which then opens up affordances for the timing of when you want to internally rotate your back hip.
Yeah.
So, it just and the player doesn't need to know any of that.
No,
right?
No, you're giving them, you're not, like, sometimes it's hard to tell players, like, okay, don't focus on your arm, focus on the ball. Like if you just do it that way, like in a lot of research, that's hard. But if you give them a new task where there's actually have to focus on this constraint you added, they do it, right? They kind of have to. And the other one I see, like kind of the thing, one person said, are these just novelty effects because you're giving them a different activity than they're used to? Okay, sure, I'll take that too. That's another bonus of, right? So much of practice, and especially in baseball, is probably, I bet you they've done some of these drills like 10,000 times, right? The same ball fielded to the same position, right? And so, like adding something different is going to have, and it's another kind of free thing you get with a lot of the constraints, right?
Right. The monotony of it, right? And again, monotony physiologically is poor recovery, right? Mm-hmm. Different variable stimulus makes it easier to recover. Mm-hmm. But motivation, interest, and we have to watch this too, because we have a lot of players that'll work with us in the off season, and then everyone wants us to give them a script, a list of things to do, sets and reps, do this many reps and this many sets. And honestly, in the beginning, because I don't really want to fight that, I got bigger battles to win. We kind of do that in the beginning. We give them a script and say, do these drills, do these exercises, do these things, this many reps, this many sets. And then they do them. And then, but then soon we have to begin to let them wander and ad lib through the script and within the boundaries. And what we've been working on is for our guys in season is intentionally sort of purposeful randomness, right? Like instead of, okay, you did these things and they helped you feel your back leg a lot better, your body's going to accommodate that and get bored with it pretty soon. So we have to change it up. And so we need to have a bucket of another things that you can do. And whether you're performing well or poorly, we're just going to change them because that's what we do. And it's going to have the same output, the same effect, but we need to do it differently. We need to get there a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I agree. And there's two things I always try to remind myself now. One is these guys are athletes, right? They're powerful, coordinated, flexible, like not all to the same degree, but let them be athletic, right? Don't make them a robot, right? And then two, they're competitors. give them a new task where there's some new challenge, like we talk about quite a bit about like adding pressure and competition in some drills. Like, let them compete.
Yeah.
They want to do that. That's why they're fresh. They're an athlete, right? We kind of push all these things aside, those two things aside too much, I think, in a lot of practice. Yeah.
Really, really important. Yeah.
So, but yeah, so we kind of, I think we tried to just set the stage of the basics of the ecological approach and then go through hitting, pitching, and fielding. I think if someone wonders, it was kind of the review process for our proposal first. Someone asked, they wanted it to be broader than baseball. They didn't know if there would be enough audience for just baseball. So that's why there's a chapter on kind of other sports, like related striking sports. But that actually led to something quite interesting that for we talk about softball, right? And I know that you kind of got you to thinking about some, adapting some of your drills and things for softball.
That was fun. Yeah, that was really exciting because we hadn't done a lot of softball. But honestly, if you understand the movement attractors, it's really just looking at And I think you heard me say this before. When I think in light of just the general overarching attractors of movement in every sport, they're kind of similar in every sport, and I'm almost better at analyzing the movement when I don't have biases, when I don't know anything about the sport, right? You just take a clean slate look at it and go, okay, regardless of what your experts say, that doesn't seem like a really good way to move to me. Looks like there might be a better way to do it. So that was kind of fun too, to kind of explore some of that stuff. It was really neat.
Yeah. So that's, if anyone's wondering, reads and wondered why, that's where that came in. But it was kind of fun in the end. But it was kind of, I wasn't expecting to do that. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I was, the idea of the lens. Like, I think attractors give you this lens to look at in almost any kind of movie, and that's what Franz does, right? And what matters, what doesn't, what could be improved, and taking out these kind of
simplifies things. It doesn't complicate it. It seems complicated, but it actually simplifies things and makes it easier to apply than if you're chasing every detail. You know?
And I think you just, you're right. These kind of biases, we get these biases about, we get latched onto the, like in baseball, there's this big, separation. It was, shoulder, hip, which is, it is a good thing, right? It's creating elastic tension, but that's not the way, the lens I think you want to view it from, right? You want to view it more from the proximal distal, leaves a much more broader, right? Than just, the person has to meet this position of creating separation. Right. It is obviously it's a good thing, but I think you think about it differently if you look at the attractor lens.
It's a byproduct of the attractors, and the body wants to keep the muscles at some degree of optimal length, or at least close, right? And isometric co-contractions or synergies solve that length problem no matter where you are. I think I have this idea that the further you get away from true optimal length of muscles, the more difficult but not impossible it is to find stability in those muscles. Okay. And so think of it as a skater on the edge of his skates. The further you get away, the harder it is to bring it back. Right. But you can still do it. Okay. It can still be done. And that's sort of closing that gap. That's sort of David Lee and Mark Latache, keep the gap close. And if you try to get too elastic with a distal or proximal with your upper body, it's really difficult in the time you have available to harness the elastic energy that you create. And so you just leak a lot of it, just gets lost. And so if you just try to achieve proximal to distal stability and let the synergy of tiny little muscle contractions emerge outward, it'll handle it for you. So
I think that's a good point. I think that also fits well with kind of Brett Fagen's idea of forward and space control, right? We want to move, but we also, at the same time, we need to keep things within our action boundaries, right? You like to lose the luge, right? Like if you get too far out of the center, you're not like, if I'm tracking a fly ball, like in the fielding example, if I let it get out of my maximal running speed, I'm not going to get to the ball. But things like pitching and stuff, it's even more serious because you're going to compensate with some muscles that can't handle that
Right.
force.
You're gonna have to do something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a new book called The Anatomical Atlas of Pitching, where I'm exploring anatomical constraints and how can you take the athlete's anatomy and use it to open up affordances for different ways to move within the boundaries of that luge. How can you want them to have different affordances, but within that bandwidth, and really digging into what that all means from the organismic constraint standpoint, as each individual's anatomy differs. What are the options available? It's colossal. It's there's so many different threads you could go down, and getting it organized is interesting. But I think it's really fun to explore that part of it, because people look at task constraints, environmental constraints all the time. But I think there's been very little research on organismic constraints and how they can influence the athlete moves.
I agree. I think it's a lot of it's very just descriptive, right? We don't actually understand how it constrains, right? Beyond like the very simple, me being 5'9" constrains my basketball movement solutions.
Yeah.
But there's also, I think we've put a lot of effort into understanding like how the number of players or the spacing, like in small side games and soccer, constrain the things you can do. But we don't really understand how, on a deep level, how your individual anatomy constrains your movement solutions. I don't think we have a good understanding of that very well. Yeah.
I've learned a lot, just because you know how it is when you start writing things, you kind of get your thoughts in order. And I've learned a lot that has helped our players, but I'm excited to share that eventually, but it's still a ways out.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, it does. It is real. Like this process was kind of like we said, it was kind of, I had a vague idea in my head. I'll write some of the theory stuff and get Randy to describe and put in the attractor and lots of examples, but putting it together made me think about some things that I really didn't. I'm like, well, how does this fit? And I think the other, I talked about it, this is my presentation at the summit this year, kind of, this is the conditions versus positions, like how is the difference between what attractor versus ideal technique. Kind of on the surface, I could see how people, aren't they the same thing? But as we were saying, it's not the same thing at all, right? It's not really, it's meaning these things. So so I enjoyed that part.
This is like 3 books in a year, right? Like, you're prolific.
Yeah, it was not maybe two. I think it's 20.
People are going to start thinking of a team of like staff members that work for you.
I just get on, no, and so no, I don't know how. I go that last one. Well, it just kind of got, I had to get it done, but and there's lots of good. I really appreciate, you put a lot of effort into generating the photos and the graphics for illustrating some of these things instead of just talking about it. I think, the picture's worth 1,000 words kind of applies a lot to these kind of activities, I think. So I think that's a part of the book I really like too. I hope
that we put something together that moves ecological dynamics and baseball player development forward a little bit. I think, you want to make a contribution. We both love the game, and either one of us was a good enough player to impact it as a player. Yeah. Maybe we can have some influence as a teacher, it would be really
and I think so. And I hope it's, as I said, it's like a tool people can use to kind of think through and, give some ideas for specific kind of issues that players might have that they want to work on, but also kind of understanding the logic of how the phrase I always like to use is I want to make people chefs, not just copy recipes, right? I want you to understand what this ingredient does and what you might be able to replace it with, right? What butter versus oil. You can, use. Sure. Yeah, that's what I hopefully that kind of achieves that end too. So I really, it was a lot of fun, Randy. Maybe we'll think of dream up another one project in the future.
Well, and I always love our conversations when you start talking. You always stimulate ideas, and so thanks for all the sharing over the years and everything. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so I appreciate it too. And so the book, it's a constraints-led approach to baseball coaching. It's through Rutledge. So I'm sure you can get on their site. So as we're recording this, we'll go, full disclosure, we saw someone post online that seems to have a electronic copy, but Randy and I don't have a physical copy. It's for pre-order on Amazon. Hopefully by the time you're listening to this, it's actually available. Like I ordered one just to test it. And
You bought your own book.
we should get author copies at some point. But I think it's gonna hopefully, it says shipping within 10 days or something. As this is the end of March, we're recording this, so hopefully soon. So keep an eye out for it. It already says it's the best-selling book in baseball coaching. So new book. So and I'm Amazon. So some people must have. Yeah.
I got an email from Amazon the other day that said, hey, based on your previous purchases, here's a book you might like. And it was the book.
Yeah, that's a good sign. Means we hit the target audience, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
So,
well, I appreciate it.
So thanks, Randy. Okay, that's it for today's episode. Remember, you can contact me at robgray@asu.edu or follow me on Twitter at ShakyWeights. To find out more about the podcast, please check out perceptionaction.com. Finally, to support the podcast and receive bonus materials, including 2 monthly coaches meetups, please head over to patreon.com/perceptionaction. This is Rob Gray from ASU. Cheers for now, and keep them coupled. Gone straight away.